God, I thank you for this opportunity to meet with these precious people and for us to be able to enter into your spirit. And I thank you that we were created in a time where your spirit is freely available to us. And um, I just claim the promise that your spirit is dwelling in each of our houses across the internet and into each of our hearts. And we just ask that you just clear out the distractions of our lives, the complications, um, and the feelings and the thoughts, and and that you just help us make room in our minds and in our hearts for you to be with us now, and for you to speak clearly now your truth for each of us today. God, speak clearly. Speak loud enough that we can hear over all the noise. We ask this in Jesus' resurrection power. Amen. All right, so we are going to jump into Judges 6 today. So while y'all are turning there, I'm just going to kind of give a big picture summary. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God was one-on-one in relationship with us. And we found a way to mess that up. And so as a result, it moves from this one-on-one relationship into a kind of a patriarchal relationship where God has a promise to Abraham. And he says, Abraham, you're going to be my guy. Your family's going to be my people. And we follow the story of God's people from that point, where God's talking mostly to the patriarch of the family. And that continues into Jacob, who wrestles with God and is renamed Israel. And it's his 12 sons that become the 12 tribes. And they, as a big family, move into Egypt. And because Joseph has connections with the Pharaoh. And they keep populating, the family keeps getting bigger, and the family of God keeps getting bigger. And then we know that new Pharaoh comes into the picture, feels threatened by this huge family, and enslaves them. And then God continues to find Moses, another patriarchal leader, who continues to be God's sounding board for the people of God. And they, with God, liberate the people of God out of enslavement and through the wilderness and up to the promised land, at which point Moses' turn is over and Joshua steps in. And the Judges starts right when Joshua passes. And there's no clear leader over the people of God. And in the beginning of Judges, it sets the stage to say, God uses this opportunity to test his people, to see if they're going to be faithful. They have everything that they need to obey God and follow his directions and follow his way for living life. And now they're going to be doing that to see if they can do that just like God ordered. But they start off on the wrong foot, because one of Joshua's last directions from God was to continue to claim the promised land that God gave them and to drive out all the other people who are living in that land. And they don't do a good job. They don't do it all the way. And instead, they start living with these other people who believe in other gods side by side. And as we've seen before, they end up allowing themselves to be polluted by those beliefs. And so there's lots of different judges throughout this book, but we're going to be focusing on Gideon today. And it's going to be, there's this reoccurring pattern that happens throughout Judges, and that is they get a chance to obey God, they disobey God, they start having the consequences of disobeying God and getting oppressed and getting beat up by these people that they failed to drive out. And they become so desperate that they finally cry out to God, and God raises up a judge. And as Judges continues, the first couple judges actually do a really good job. And then we're kind of focusing on Gideon, who's one of the judges that, does an okay job, but ends up making some mistakes. It's an imperfect execution of their role. And then they start getting really bad. And the book of Judges is really very, very violent. And so we're going to jump in now to see what Gideon does. Let me start in chapter 2. This is kind of setting the stage still. So the angel of the Lord went up from, this is at the very beginning of Judges. The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you out of Egypt and led you to the land I had promised to your fathers. I also said, I will never break my covenant with you. You are not to make a covenant with the people you are living in this land, and you are to tear down their altars. But you have not obeyed me. What is this that you have done? Therefore, I will now say, I will not drive out these people before you. They will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will trap you. And so that is exactly what continues to happen over and over and over again. Is they don't drive out the bad influences of their lives. And again, these people, these bad influences become the thorn in their side. So if you read through Judges, you end up seeing this reoccurring pattern, like I mentioned. So I'm going to read a couple verses. I'm going to jump around. Don't feel like you have to follow me. But in chapter 2, verse 11, it says, the Israelites did what was evil in the Lord's sight. And then if you go on a little bit further, in chapter 3, the Israelites did what was evil in the Lord's sight. And then chapter 4, again, the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And so they continue to keep doing what's evil. And they keep going back to their what's easy and to these bad influences. So let's dive into chapter 6, verse 1. This is when Gideon's story begins. And yet again, the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord handed them over to Midian for 7 years, and they oppressed Israel. Because of Midian, the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and Kedemites came and attacked them. They encamped against them and destroyed the produce of the land. Even as far as Gaza, they left nothing for Israel to eat, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. For the Midianites came with their cattle and their tents like a great swarm of locusts. They and their camels were without number, and they entered the land to waste it. So Israel became poverty-stricken because of Midian, and the Israelites cried out to the Lord. This is a huge oppressive force. The fact that they couldn't even count how many camels. I don't know. I struggled to imagine. A camel is a big animal, and I've seen war scenes where people come storming in on horses. I can't imagine what a sea of camels looks like to swipe in, and they're doing a good job of taking control. They just come in like a swarm of locusts and just eat everything up or just completely ruin it. I was trying to think what this might look in a more comparable situation. And it reminded me maybe of like a hurricane coming in, and a bad hurricane coming in knocks out all the power we had a storm do this when we were living in Arkansas, especially, and we were without power for a whole week. And all of our food went bad. And fortunately, we were able to go to the grocery store. But imagine if all your power goes out, you don't have any food in the fridge. Let's say all your pantry gets used up, and then there's nothing in the grocery store. And that's easy to think about in a week, but then everything gets back to normal. But imagine if that goes on for a month, 6 months, and a year, and 7 years. These people are hungry. They're hiding. There's no safe place for them. So they're literally hiding in caves and mountains. And this just happens over and over and over again. Imagine how that the desperation that feels, what that would do to your soul, what that would do to your relationships and your family to be in this kind of situation. And and the Midianites are good at this. And so this is one, a very physical oppression for them, a very practical oppression for them, but it's also a spiritual oppression for them to not be able to gather together and worship, to feel this much anxiety definitely impacts the way that you're going to be able to go with God. And whether or not we have a practical oppression right now, allow this to speak into how you might be feeling spiritually, socially, attacked right now. There's so much going on in the world, and there's so much going on in each of our lives. Put yourself into that situation as we continue to go through this text, and allow yourself to feel the desperation for freedom, for God to do a new work in the kingdom. And so the Israelites cried out to him. And in verse 11, we're going to see where Gideon steps into this picture. The angel of the Lord came, and he sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash. His son Gideon was threshing wheat in the wine vat in order to hide it from the Midianites. All right, so wine vat. It's a big pit, and they throw all the grapes into it. And then they jump down into it and they start stomping all the grapes. And they keep stomping all the grapes until they squeeze out all the juice. They scoop up all the grape skins, throw it out, and they start making wine. Very, very different than a threshing floor for wheat. Okay, so wheat, you scoop it up, you throw all the heads down into a hard floor, and then you stomp on it to break off the shell. Like imagine a peanut. You crack open the shell, you pop in the peanuts. It's the same kind of idea. And then once you smash all of the shells off of the heads of wheat, then you scoop it up and you throw it in the air. And then you want to have this floor in a place where it's usually high and clear so that there's lots of wind to blow all of the shells off as you throw it up. And then the heavy wheat fall back down. And after doing this enough, you have nothing but shelled wheat heads. But to stand in a very open, high place where a lot of wind is going to expose him to the Midianites. And so instead of doing that, he's hiding in a vat. And I don't know how much time it's taking him to do this process, the slow hiding way in a vat. And then it's already said that they've already destroyed all their crops. And so I imagine Gideon must have snuck out in the night to like go to whatever was left out of these wheat fields to scoop up whatever. And how many people is he having to feed at this point? I don't know, but this is a really, really low spot in Gideon's life where he is hiding, he's scraping up whatever he can find. And while he's hiding, he's trying to meager out whatever sustenance that he can. This is not a very glorious moment in his life. But the angel of the Lord shows up. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." I doubt he feels like a mighty warrior at this time. But that's what's so great about God, is that he never sees us only by where we are right now. He sees us in who we are becoming in him. And Gideon is not a mighty warrior right now, but God speaks that over him. And that is the way he's speaking over you, regardless of what you're wrestling with or where God has you in this moment, in this life. God is ready to speak his vision of your identity over you. Because and that's so encouraging that no matter whatever I'm wrestling with, he's calling me something over me, a new name. And I still don't know what that name might be. And it might be it is so much more glorious than I'm even ready to imagine. And it's also exciting to imagine what that might be, what he is planning to do with you and you and you, and how he's going to call us into what we are stepping into becoming. So let's continue. The Lord turned him and said, "Go in the strength you have and deliver Israel from the power of Midian. Am I not sending you?" What a challenge to go in the strength that you have. How much courage does that take? Because Gideon did not have a lot of strength, but he didn't need a lot of strength either. He only needed to use the strength that he had and trust God with the rest. Because is not God sending each of us into kingdom work today and this week? And yet we have the option to wait for more strength that may or may not come, that we may or may not need. And this is going to play even more into the story that's coming up. But we have this choice to believe in ourselves and the strength that God has given us, the tools that God has given us in our classrooms, in our workspace, in our neighborhoods, or we can start giving out excuses. And so let's continue on. He said to him, "Please, Lord, how can I deliver Israel? Look at my family as the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's house. But I will be with you," the Lord said to him. "You will strike Midian down as if it were one man." And so then he said to them, "If I have found favor in your sight, give me a sign that you are speaking with me. Please do not leave this place until I return to you. Let me bring my gift and set it before you." And so he prepares a gift, and then the angel tells him to start the work by tearing down the false idols. And in the interest of time, I'll let y'all read over that later. But even then, he starts doing that work, but he does it at night because he's scared of how his community is going to fight him back on this. And they do start getting upset. But I want to skip over to the sign that he asks for. So lost my place. Where are my notes? Okay, so then Gideon said to God, "If you will deliver Israel by my hand, as you said," this is in verse 36, "I will put out a fleece of wool, a blanket of wool here on the threshing floor. And in the morning," I don't know if y'all been out walking in the grass in the morning very much, but the cool ground and the warm air, or vice versa, touch together, and there's typically a lot of wet dew on the grass every morning. And this was the same true back then. And so if you leave a blanket out, the same thing's going to happen. The grass will be wet, the blanket will be wet. And so he's challenging God. "I will put a blanket of wool here on the threshing floor. And if the dew is only on the fleece, but the grass is all dry, I will know that you will deliver Israel by my strength, as you said." And that is what happened. When he got up early in the morning, he squeezed the fleece and wrung dew out of it, filling a whole bowl of water, but the ground was dry. And so he asked God, he doesn't believe, angel of the Lord showing up, giving him a challenge, asking for him to trust in the power of God. And he's asking for a sign. And then he decided that he believed God. No, he did not. That was not still enough. And so Gideon then said to God, "Don't be angry with me. Let me speak one more time. Please allow me to make one more test with the fleece. Let it be dry this time, and the dew be all over the ground." That night, God did as Gideon requested, and only the fleece was dry, and the dew was all over the ground. And so this speaks to two things. One, the unbelief of Gideon, that he decided he was not ready to believe all of who God is. And it also speaks to the character and patience and love of God, to be patient with our unbelief, because Gideon did want to believe, even though he was being delayed to a sign. All right, so now let's continue to see what happens next. In chapter 7, verse 2, the Lord said to Gideon, So Gideon gets his army together, and the Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many people for me to hand the Midianites over to you, or else Israel might brag, I did it myself." And God wants to make this clear. This, what he is going to do and how he is going to save Israel, is him saving Israel. It is not Israel saving itself. So now announce in the presence of the people, whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 of the people turn back, but 10,000 remain. So he has an army of 32,000. And 2/3 of them say, "Oh yeah, I'm really nervous about this. I'm really scared, so I'm going to go back home." And now he's just, he could have had an army of 32,000, and now he only has 10,000. So then the Lord said to Gideon, "There are still too many people. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. If I say to you, this one can go with you, he can go. But if I say about anyone, this one cannot go with you, he cannot go." So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, "Separate everyone who laps the water with his tongue like a dog. Do the same with everyone who kneels down to drink." And so they're watching how these guys are going to be drinking the water. The number of those who lapped with their hands to their mouths was 300 men. All the rest, so 9,700 others, all the rest of the people knelt to drink the water. The Lord said to Gideon, "I will deliver you with the 300 men who lapped and hand the Midianites over to you. But everyone else is to go home." So Gideon sent all the Israelites to their tents, but kept the 300 who took the people's provisions and their trumpets. The camp of Midian was below him in the valley. I cannot imagine having an army of 32,000 men and sending them all home with 300. That is such a huge reduction. That takes so much faith, but it's going to be obvious that God shows up. And so let's see what happens next. So in verse 16, then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies and gave each of them a trumpet in one hand and an empty pitcher with a torch inside it in the other. "Watch me," he said, "and do the same. When I come to the outposts of the camp, do as I do. And when I and everyone with me blow our trumpets, you are also to blow your trumpet all around the camp. Then you will say, 'For Yahweh and for Gideon.'" You see what he did there? God is doing this, and he's wanting all the credit, and he kind of sneaks his own name in there. It shows the fact that God is using imperfect people as they are for his glory. And let's continue. Gideon and the 100 men who were with him went to the outposts of the camp, and beginning of the middle of the watch, after the sentries had been stationed, they blew their trumpets and broke their pitchers that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew their trumpets and shattered their pitchers. Then they held their torches in their left hands and their trumpets in their right hands and shouted, "A sword for Yahweh and for Gideon." Each Israelite took his position around the camp, and the entire Midianite army fled and cried as they ran. When Gideon's men blew their 300 trumpets, the Lord set the swords of each man in that army against each other, and they fled. And we're going to continue to see, if you read through the rest of chapter 8, that God uses their faith, these torches in the night, and the noise of the trumpets in the night to confuse this huge army with countless camels to start attacking each other. And then they do most of the damage to themselves in this confusion. And then Gideon leads these people to continue to drive out the Midianites. And later we find that they ended up killing over 120,000 warriors. 300 versus 120,000. This is an enormous miracle that he's using. But it's interesting to see how God could not use Gideon's 32,000, because that was too much for his own name, and it was too much for God's name. And it makes me wonder, how often do we try to stack our deck too much for our own name? And how could we benefit from reducing that deck so that God gets more glory? And so as we look in the story of Gideon, he is calling him to step up into kingdom work. And he's doing that with an imperfect person, looking at not who he is now and where he is now, but looking into who God knows Gideon can be. And despite his doubts and his self-disqualifications and his unbelief and needing sign after sign, Gideon allows himself to step into that kingdom work. And under God's leadership is able to humble his forces and humble himself enough so that God can show exactly how powerful he can be in this moment. And we can look to the story of Gideon and see the exact same thing for where we are now, in our desk at school, in our homes with our kids during the week, in our jobs. And so I want us to I do have some questions for us to look into.